For about 2 seconds, your brain is going to lie to you, and it's going to do it so convincingly that you won't be able to argue your way out of it, even though you know, with total certainty, that it's impossible. You'll be mid-sentence, or walking into a room, or catching a specific angle of light on a wall, and out of nowhere your entire body will insist on something that cannot be true. This has happened before, not something similar. This exact second, this exact conversation, this exact light. And then, just as fast as it landed, the feeling vanishes, and you're left standing there, slightly shaken, trying to explain to yourself what your own brain just did to you. That's déjà vu. And here's what makes it genuinely strange. It isn't a memory. You can't point to when this supposedly happened before. There's no scene to recall, no date, no context, nothing. Just a bone-deep certainty that you've lived this exact moment already, sitting right next to the equally certain knowledge that you haven't. Two contradictory facts, both feeling completely true. At the same time, inside the same head. So, what is actually happening in there? And why has something this common still managed to confuse neuroscientists for over a century? Start with the numbers, because they're bigger than most people assume. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of people report experiencing déjà vu at least once in their life, and for a lot of them, it's not a one-time thing. It happens repeatedly, sometimes several times a year. It tends to peak hard during adolescence and young adulthood, roughly the teenage years through the mid-20s, then gradually fades as people get older. That age pattern alone turned out to be a major clue one researcher spent decades chasing down. For most of scientific history, déjà vu was almost impossible to study directly. You can't schedule one. You can't ask someone to have one in a lab on command. It shows up uninvited, lasts a few seconds, and disappears without leaving a single physical trace. For a long time, that made it one of the most frustrating phenomena in psychology, sitting somewhere between a real neurological event and something too slippery to pin down with real data. Then researchers found an unexpected way in, through epilepsy. Some patients with a specific type of epilepsy, originating in a brain region called the temporal lobe, report intense déjà vu sensations right before a seizure begins. Because these patients were often already undergoing brain monitoring for medical reasons, doctors and neuroscientists got a rare, almost accidental opportunity. They could watch, in real time on an EEG or during direct brain stimulation, exactly what was happening the moment déjà vu hit. What they found changed everything. Stimulating one specific area inside the temporal lobe, tied directly into the brain's memory system, could reliably trigger the sensation of déjà vu, even when absolutely nothing unusual was happening around the patient. That told researchers something important. Déjà vu isn't some vague, mystical experience floating outside normal brain function. It's wired directly into a specific physical location inside your memory system, and it can be switched on with an electrode. That region, especially structures like the hippocampus and the surrounding temporal lobe, functions almost like a constant cross-referencing engine. Every time you experience something, your brain is silently comparing the incoming information against everything already stored, checking for matches, similarities, familiar patterns. Under normal conditions, this runs so smoothly, so far below conscious awareness, that you never notice it's happening at all. One of the leading theories is that déjà vu comes from a small hiccup in that exact matching process. Specifically, some researchers believe the brain's familiarity system occasionally fires a little too early, or a little too strongly, slapping the internal tag "you've encountered this before" onto a completely new experience before your conscious mind has even finished processing what's actually happening. In other words, the feeling of familiarity arrives first, on its own, and your conscious brain, scrambling to explain a signal it didn't generate, tries to make sense of it after the fact. Since there's no real matching memory to point to, because the moment genuinely is new, you're left holding a powerful, unshakable sensation of recognition attached to absolutely nothing. There's a related theory built around how similar a new situation is to something you've experienced before, even when you can't consciously spot the connection. Under this idea, sometimes called the Gestalt Familiarity Hypothesis, your brain notices that the overall shape of a scene, the layout of furniture, the angle of a doorway, The general rhythm of a conversation closely resembles something buried in your past, even when none of the individual details actually match. Your brain flags the structural resemblance as familiar without ever consciously locating the earlier memory it's pulling from. Under this explanation, déjà vu isn't quite a glitch. It's closer to two normally separate systems, one that recognizes patterns and one that consciously recalls specific memories, briefly firing out of sync with each other. There's also a theory involving something called dual processing, the idea that your brain runs multiple pathways simultaneously to handle incoming sensory information. Under normal conditions, these pathways stay tightly synced, feeding into your conscious awareness at essentially the same instant. The dual processing theory proposes that déjà vu might happen when one of those pathways lags behind the other by a tiny fraction of a second. Your brain ends up receiving the same information twice, in extremely close succession, and reads the second wave as a memory of the first, even though both happened only milliseconds apart in the exact same moment. This would explain why déjà vu feels so immediate and so specific. You're not confusing this moment with something from years ago. You're catching your own brain in the act, processing the same instant slightly out of step with itself. Here's where it gets even stranger, because déjà vu isn't actually one single experience. Researchers have identified several distinct subtypes, each with a slightly different flavor and, likely, a different underlying cause. The classic version, the one most people mean when they say déjà vu, is called déjà vécu, meaning already lived. This is the powerful, unmistakable sense that you've lived through this exact situation before, often paired with an eerie feeling of knowing what happens next. A prediction that almost never actually comes true once you pay attention. There's also déjà senti, already felt, a more emotional version tied to a mood or feeling rather than a specific scene. And there's déjà visité, already visited, an unsettling sense of already knowing a physical place you've never actually been to, sometimes including a confident but completely wrong sense of knowing your way around it. Each variant likely draws on slightly different memory systems in the brain, which is a big part of why déjà vu has resisted a single, tidy explanation. It might not be one glitch. It might be a small family of related glitches, all producing a similar subjective feeling. Abinge plays a genuinely significant role here, and it's one of the more consistent findings across dozens of studies. Déjà vu happens far more often in younger people, and its frequency steadily declines with age, which seems backwards at first. You'd expect an experience tied to memory processing to become more common, as you accumulate more memories to potentially confuse. Instead, the opposite happens. One leading explanation ties this directly to brain development. The frontal lobe, particularly the areas responsible for critical thinking, error checking, and separating real memories from false signals, keeps developing well into a person's 20s. Some researchers believe that as this region matures and gets better at catching small errors in the memory system, it starts quietly suppressing these false familiarity signals before they ever reach conscious awareness. Older adults, under this theory, aren't necessarily generating fewer memory glitches. Their brains have just gotten more efficient at correcting them silently before they turn into a noticeable jolt of déjà vu. Stress and fatigue matter too, and this isn't just anecdotal. Multiple studies have found that déjà vu shows up more often during periods of high stress, sleep deprivation, or general exhaustion, exactly the conditions already known to disrupt normal memory processing and attention. When your brain is running on limited sleep or working under heavy cognitive load, the precise timing between different memory and perception systems can slip slightly, which may create exactly the kind of processing mismatch these theories describe. Travel and novelty seem to matter as well. People who report more new environments, more unfamiliar places, more variation in their day-to-day routine tend to report déjà vu more frequently than people living highly repetitive, unchanging lives. That fits neatly with the Gestalt Familiarity theory. More new experiences mean more chances for your brain to spot a structural resemblance between a genuinely new moment and something buried in memory, Even when you can't consciously place exactly where that earlier moment came from, there's also a curious link between déjà vu and dreams that researchers keep running into. A significant number of people who experience déjà vu report a strange accompanying sensation, a vague, unplaceable feeling that the moment resembles something from a dream they can't quite recall. Some scientists suspect this isn't a coincidence. Sleep, especially REM sleep, is when the brain does much of its work consolidating memories, sorting daily experiences and filing them away for long-term storage. It's possible that fragments of forgotten dreams or fragments of memories half processed during sleep occasionally surface just enough to create that eerie sense of resemblance without ever fully rising into conscious recall. Under this view, déjà vu might sometimes be your sleeping brain's filing system briefly leaking into your waking one. Despite all this progress, despite narrowing down which brain regions light up and being able to trigger it artificially with an electrode, there's still no single universally agreed upon explanation for exactly why déjà vu happens. Part of the difficulty is built into the phenomenon itself. It's brief, unpredictable, deeply personal, and vanishes without leaving anything behind to examine afterward. Interestingly, this experience isn't a modern discovery either, even though the scientific term is fairly recent, coined in the late 1800s by a French researcher studying unusual memory phenomena. Long before neuroscience existed, philosophers and writers across many cultures described versions of this exact sensation, reaching for supernatural or spiritual explanations since no biological one was available yet. Some interpreted it as evidence of a past life bleeding through into the present. Others treated it as a kind of prophetic glimpse, fate quietly repeating a pattern. Without any way to look inside the brain, these explanations filled a real gap, because the feeling itself has clearly existed for as long as humans have had memories to compare things against. What researchers do seem to agree on is that déjà vu isn't a warning sign. For the overwhelming majority of people, it isn't a symptom of anything wrong at all. It looks like a normal, if genuinely strange, side effect of an extraordinarily complex memory system, one that spends every waking second silently comparing your present experience against a lifetime of stored information, almost entirely without your conscious awareness. Every so often, that comparison process throws a small, harmless spark, and for 2 or 3 seconds, it convinces you the present moment already happened. So the next time it hits you, that sudden eerie certainty that you've already lived through this exact second, know that you're not glimpsing a hidden memory. And you haven't stumbled onto some fold in time. You're catching a brief, fascinating misfire inside one of the most sophisticated pattern matching systems in the known universe, a system so good at spotting familiarity that every once in a while it finds a connection that isn't actually there and hands you a feeling with absolutely nowhere real to put it.